Today, we're talking about Quebec's amendments to their French language law, which were in a bill called Bill 96. That bill amends the province's Charter of the French Language, famously known as Bill 101, but it also makes changes to the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, the Civil Code of Quebec, and perhaps most controversially, the Canadian Constitution. The bill was adopted by Quebec's National Assembly in May of 2022, but certain parts only just came into force in June of this year. These newly enforced provisions include restrictions on communication with the provincial government in languages other than French, French language requirements for certain contracts, and the requirement that small businesses tell the government how many of their employees don't speak French. The law was designed to protect the use of French in Quebec, but has prompted protests, court challenges, and concern from English speakers, as well as other minority language speakers, as well as legal experts. Here today to talk about what Bill 96 means, including the newly enforced provision, are two experts, lawyers Julius Grey and Alexandre Fallon. Thank you both so much for joining me today. Let's start with what this law does very broadly. Julius, we'll start with you. What is the purpose of this law, and how has it played out so far?
Well, the official purpose of this law is to protect the French language and to prevent it from disappearing. The real purpose is something very different because there is no danger to the French language. The danger is invented. There used to be a danger before Bill 101 when there was freedom of choice in education. And then you can imagine that all the immigrants might have gone to English school and basically anglicized Quebec. But there is no danger right now. And the purpose of the law is to make Quebec completely unilingual. It's an expression of disdain for the minority, really, or for the tradition. They say that they want to make Quebec French safe in Quebec, but in fact, they're not preserving French. What they're doing is they're rolling back English. They're trying to prevent any other language from being used. So it's a false pretext. It's a false assumption that French is in danger. And it's basically a restrictive law which reduces rights of all people, Francophones, as well as Anglophones and immigrants.
Alexandre, I want to give you a chance to respond to that. What's your perspective on the purpose of the law and anything you want to respond to in what Julius has said there?
Well, I think the purpose of the law is to reinforce the protections of the French language that have been enforced since the 70s. From my perspective, I'm not really qualified to say whether it's a good purpose or a bad purpose, so I won't go there. But suffice to say, it's certainly the law certainly does take measures that are quite drastic. I think the biggest element from my perspective as a business lawyer is the fact that the law empowers every single Quebec resident to sue any company that offers products or services in Quebec if they're not satisfied with the degree in which those products or services were offered in French. And so it introduces a huge level of risk for companies, both Quebec companies and international companies that do business in Quebec. And I think that that's probably the biggest risk from where I'm sitting is a reduction in products and services offered to Quebec residents because of these new risks posed by the law.
Now, we've only got about a minute left, but I want to follow up on what you just said there, Alexandre, because I'm thinking of companies like Amazon, for example, or online companies, even small online retailers that you can have an item shipped into Quebec. Would this law apply to those, maybe even mom and pop foreign-based shops that ship things into Quebec? Could they be liable for not offering their services in French, even though they're located in a completely different jurisdiction?
Yeah, there's certainly a risk, and it's certainly the government's position that it certainly does. As soon as you sell something into Quebec, wherever you're situated, that transaction, from the government's perspective, should be governed by Quebec law and these language rights attached to that. And that's really a function of the fact that the Quebec Consumer Protection Act already provides that if you are doing an online transaction, that transaction is deemed to be concluded at the residence of the consumer, which is in Quebec, and therefore Quebec law applies. That's their position.